So Joker, Folie à Deux, is the sequel to Todd Phillips' 2019 Joker film, which honestly really didn't work for me. I know a lot of people loved it because they liked the kind of like the griminess of having a more grounded Joker that tries to like explore that tries to explore like mental health and class divide, which the first film did kind of do that. Like, it kind of stumbled around here and there, but you could mostly read those surface level messages. My biggest problem was just that there was so much in the film that contradicted itself, and just didn't really build. It just felt like a pastiche of a bunch of like great scenes for like Joaquin Phoenix to like kind of like step into, and just control. But in terms of like a narrative focus, I felt that Todd Phillips is just all over the place. But at least at least with like the first film, I could kind of like tilt my head and kind of squint and try to see what everyone kind of loved about it. Like, I mean, like I like like it's a film that literally says eat the rich, so I guess like the class divide stuff is easier to read for like people who are familiar with comic book films but want something more subversive and more grounded. And wanted that out of like a DC Comics film, which is why that film became, I imagine why that film became like such a big success. That and Phoenix's performance and all that. But with Folie à Deux, I would have to like twist myself into a pretzel in order to see like the greater impact here. Like, I can see where Phillips was kind of heading towards with this film, but at the same time, it's a much messier film. It's a much more contradictory film, and it's just a film that's not comfortable with itself and isn't sure what it wants to do with this material. Because like my biggest problem with how Todd Phillips approaches this material with the Joker is that I mean, Todd Phillips has been pretty open, saying like he really doesn't like comic book movies. In fact, like before he made the first Joker film, like immediately before the first Joker film, he made a film called War Dogs, which was a kind of like a lukewarm true story arms dealing type of film that kind of waffled between comedy and drama here and there, and it wasn't a big success. It was, critics were very lukewarm on it, and Phillips just kind of frustrated, saying how he doesn't like the current movie landscape with like comic book movies and all that. So I kind of understand his frustration, where he's kind of like, oh, okay, fine, you want comic book movies? I'll do a comic book movie, but it's going to be on my own terms, and I'm going to contort it and revise it to make it the type of film that I want to make it. And at that level, I know like a lot of people who are like big devotees of like, the DC Comics lore and all that would probably hate the film on those merits alone, which I don't. I'm completely fine if someone wants to take the DC Comics material and use it as kind of like a lattice for trying to make a better film. The problem was Phillips really didn't make a better film. He kind of made kind of like a wannabe Scorsese street thriller that just didn't have a firm thematic focus, and it was scattershot, and it was all over the place, and it relied on a lot of its atmosphere to entrance people into like the story of this type of Joker, of Arthur Fleck, played by Joaquin Phoenix. So Folie à Deux, I think, is more thematically lost, and I think it's just because like it's a film that isn't quite sure what it wants to be. Like, I've heard that Phillips said that he kind of did want to do a musical, but was also kind of hesitant. Because, like, he's been very open, like, oh, well, it's not really a musical. It is. If you've watched this film, it's, like, straight up a jukebox musical, which would be fine, but the thing is, like, the musical sequences in this film, because they're pretty much all imaginary. They're all from the point of view of Arthur, who, after the events of the first Joker film, just retreats into his own imagination of what would be like a better life, to be more of like a showman, and there isn't much of a build there. And I think most of that is because like the musical sequences don't really find they don't really find like a firm path for what they're trying to do here. Like they fluctuate between like, classic Hollywood show tunes and like 60s folk rock. And I think they do a little bit of gospel at one point. And it's just, it doesn't really build up to anything. And more importantly, I think they don't really feel like fantasies that much, because you do see like the reality bleed in there of Arthur being betrayed and Arthur just not being a good singer. Because when you're seeing these fantasy sequences, yes, he is appearing, as like the Joker that he was in like the last film, but it's just the same Joker. It's not even like the fantasy version of that. And I think the film kind of prepares you for that by having this animated prologue, which it seems like it's trying to stage it like a classic Looney Tunes cartoon, and it doesn't really have that appeal, and it doesn't really say much of anything about Arthur or his fantasies or where he wants to go in all this, because the whole framing of Folie à Deux is that it's mostly about Arthur going on trial for his crimes, which is I will say this, it's an interesting idea. I like the idea of kind of this film interrogating itself and, basically interrogating the last film through Arthur by bringing in all these people who witnessed his atrocities. So you kind of got a little bit of, similar staging to how, like the last episode of Seinfeld brought everyone into question. This film kind of does that by bringing back a few, like, familiar characters from the last film and talking about Arthur and his crimes. But at the same time, like, it wanders here and there. Like, it's mostly just reiterating and reviewing. It doesn't really interrogate that much. Because, like, you would think that, through Arthur's lens, like, this would have to have some sort of, like, effect on him. But his mind keeps wandering. He keeps getting lost in his own delusions. And he becomes much more obsessed with Harleen Quinzel, or as this film wants to call her, Lee, played by Lady Gaga, who is mostly just in the film as a siren. She's, basically meant to, like, encapsulate the obsessed fan who loves the idea of Joker and how people have become obsessed with him, not just as, like, someone who's fighting against, like, the elites of Gotham, but also just, like, like a symbol that people rally behind. And I do like the fact that the sequel does kind of try to frame the last film as being like this made-for-TV movie, which it would have been nice to get, like, see a little bit of few glimpses of that. Like, I understand, yes, it's meant to just, be more of like a representational thing. It's not really that important that you see it. I would just, I think that would actually be a good, like, little comedic detour here and there, just to say, like, yeah, here's how ridiculous the last film looked if you idolized it and what you took away from it. And I say that only because, like, this is a very long film running well over 2 hours, and it just meanders around all over the place. Like, the courtroom drama scenes keep going on, and like I said, they don't really interrogate much of anything. Not until, like, I think, like, the last few court scenes is there any bigger revelation within Arthur's life. That most of them just kind of feel like filibustering, like they're just taking up time. They're really not that interesting. You have the prison drama scenes, which I thought were kind of interesting, but again, like, they feel like they're building to something, and they don't really have much of a payoff here. Especially with Brendan Gleeson playing one of the guards, Jackie Sullivan, which at first, I the way that I looked at it is I thought this role was supposed to be like a play on the 60s Batman show, how they would have, like, the Irish cop. I thought they were kind of trying to play it up because, like, he does seem a little bit jovial and kind of friendly around Arthur, until Arthur starts embracing more of his Joker side, and then Jackie turns darker and more vicious, and that just kind of feels like the go-to for Todd Phillips here. Is just slathering everything with this grime, to cover up the fact that, like, that the thematic build here about ultimately Arthur learning that, like, this Joker persona is not something he wants to embrace and has, like, a harmful effect, which doesn't really build throughout the film. It feels like a last minute thing that he realizes as the trial is coming to an end, just admit outright. It's like, I don't want to be Joker anymore. It's like, it's pretty much like that I Think You Should Leave Now sketch, where Tim Robinson puts on all this makeup to go in disguise in a mall, and is just frustrated, doesn't know what to do, and he's just angry, and just eventually just gives up and says, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be Joker 2019 anymore. That's ultimately what this ends up being. It just feels like Todd Phillips doesn't really know what he wants to do with this material, and I think it's just because, honestly, I think just the way that it's framed, it looks like Todd Phillips is unsure of the type of film that he wanted to make. Because like I said, it's clearly a musical, but he doesn't want to admit it's a musical. He's said that he doesn't strictly want to do what the comic book lore does here, and yet he's still framed like Bruce Wayne within the last film, and within this film he frames Harvey Dent. And not only does he put Harvey Dent in there, but he also like stages his origins that lead to him becoming Two-Face, and just like why did you need there's no point to any of this. It's just like it's just comic book Easter eggs. It's like, it's so frustrating too, because it feels like Phillips is trying to do something different, but he's not that in tune with like comic books or comic book movies to understand that no, this isn't as subversive as you think it is. Because from what I've heard from interviews, Phillips seems to think that including Harley Quinn would be a little bit refreshing to have someone that Joker can play off of, despite the fact that the last time we saw a Joker, not counting his last minute appearance in the Batman, but in the Suicide Squad, he was with Harley Quinn. And in fact, we've gotten more Harley Quinn in the past DC Comics films than Joker in the past. So it's not an original or a refreshing idea to have Harley Quinn included in there. It feels very much like what you would expect from like a comic book movie that tries to adhere to what fans might like, but also wants to divert as much as possible. There's going to be a lot of people who would be fans of like the first Joker film who are going to hate this film, possibly because it's more disjointed and it doesn't have enough faith in itself. But I imagine for a lot of people, it's also going to be for how it feels like it's betrayed them, because it wants this Joker to be framed as a bad guy and not a revolutionary, which it's obvious. It's hammering the point home, which I would be fine with if it didn't arrive so inexplicably. Like it's almost like an afterthought by the third act, where Phillips is kind of like, maybe I should make it more clear that, Joker's a bad guy and you're not really supposed to encourage the crap that he does in this film, and that it's ultimately going to lead to a terrible spot, which most people who could read the thematic elements through the last film could see it. You have to peer through a lot of the muck that gets thrown at the screen with it, but it's there. Within this film, like I said, it's scattershot. It doesn't really build up Arthur much as like, a character who's thinking about this stuff, and it just meanders around all these ideas and just kind of ends abruptly after 2.5 hours of dull courtroom scenes and inconsistent musical fantasy scenes and prison drama scenes that are mostly lukewarm. I think between all those sequences, I think probably the prison drama was my favorite, only because I felt there was more stakes and tensions and actual buildup between characters going on there. And it's not just because, like, Phillips doesn't want to make this version of it. It's pretty clear this isn't the version of the Joker you want to make. I mean, it's Bruce Wayne was a kid in here. This Joker's named Arthur Fleck, which is a name that, most people know Jack Napier and all that. So this is definitely not really the Joker. It's mostly Todd Phillips's ideas of the Joker, which again, I think is fine. I think it's fine as an idea. You can use DC Comics as a lattice to tell different types of films. In fact, we saw it this year with the People's Joker, which I thought did a great job taking past iterations of the Joker and using them to form a more personal story with a very firm thematic core and heart to it that you can follow and that you can see what the inspiration is. For taking all this DC Comics material and trying to weave a better film out of it. This sequel is just lost. It meanders all over the place, and I think Phillips has said that he wanted to make this seem like a film that was made by crazy people, which yeah, kinda, but not in the probably not in the good way that I think that he wanted the film to seem like a very very cerebral and very introspective film about Joker as an icon, as an idea, and basically attacking aspects of idealizing this symbol, this violent symbol, and somewhat more of like a critique of toxic masculinity. That's the biggest problem. It's just, it doesn't build. It's inconsistent. So many of these scenes contradict other scenes, and a lot of the ideas here just don't boil up that well. Like Lady Gaga is mostly here as like a siren. She has some good singing, but I mean, it's Lady Gaga. You expect that from her, and she doesn't really have much dialogue or much of a much interest beyond just being like an eager fan who is kind of like I said, she's a siren. She lures Arthur into embracing more of this Joker side, which again, these are all good ideas. Like the way that I'm saying this, like, yeah, these are good ideas. I would like to see these, build up in a Joker film, but they don't. They're just like, okay, here's the prison scene, here's the musical scene, here's the courtroom scene, and we're gonna fluctuate between them, and the film will just kind of like end eventually. On a note where it's like, I don't want to be the Joker anymore. It's not just about breaking lore. I'm fine with them breaking lore if they want to make, if the people behind breaking the lore want to make a better film. And Todd Phillips didn't. He didn't with the first Joker film, and he really doesn't with this Joker sequel.